Hi everybody, Loki the Scottish rapper here, cultural terrorism with a splash of self-regard, a big splash. I just wanted to talk today about minimum alcohol pricing. So the Scottish Government in 2012 proposed legislation that would put a 50p minimum price per unit of alcohol on all alcohol products in Scotland. And the thinking behind this is that it was recommended by many people allegedly in the know as one part of a wider strategy to tackle what is very evidently a massive culture of binge drinking with various gradations of social harm, both immediate and long term, and also cultural. An attitude that we take towards booze, that we're born into, that we become subject to, and that actually drives many of us to an early grave in this country by increasing numbers. So something has to be done. We do agree on that, but there is disagreement about what sort of strategy we should take. And sometimes discussing the potential solutions is increasingly difficult in Scotland because we have a wider context of constant constitutional posturing from both sides of the yes no independence debate. So it's sometimes very difficult to even just discuss honestly the issues at hand because of the prejudice and bitterness and ultimately the distrust between these two factions from which policy and ideas about Scotland's issues usually emerges. So, my own personal view on this, despite the fact that I'm not known as a Scottish Government cheerleader in any way, shape, or form, is that if they go through with this legislation, it will be hopefully the beginning of a wider strategy to try and turn the tide on binge drinking culture and generally the harmful cultural attitude that we have collectively towards alcohol in this country. Um, I think that this process is quite analogous to the turning the tide on the smoking culture. So, just 10, 15 years ago, people smoked in bars, people smoked indoors, lots of people were smoking. It wasn't unusual to be walking through plumes of smoke wherever you were going. And now what we have is a situation where smoking is becoming relatively culturally taboo. Now, particularly in public spaces, around children. Most people who smoke don't want to smoke, are trying to stop smoking. In fact, in order to cope with the decrease in demand for cigarettes, the smoking industry has had to diversify into a whole plethora of other products which are far less harmful, still addictive, but far less harmful than smoking in the traditional form. And so this can only be seen as a victory, and this was only achieved by a government stepping in on behalf of its people to try and intervene in order to turn a tide on a public health issue which is not only serious and has implications for the well-being of the people who suffer, but also has massive cost implications for the society in the short, long, and medium term. And so any government that looks to step in and face off against what is essentially a very powerful food and drinks industry and lobby, then that has to be commended. And for me, if the SNP go through with this, then I'll be willing to hear more of what they've got to say on some other issues, having gone through a very long cooling period in relation to them, because I believe there has been at times an inverse relationship between what they say they want to do and what they actually do. If they go through with these plans to put a 50p minimum price per unit of alcohol, then that signals to me that they've got a bit of teeth about addressing an issue, because the pushback is going to come in the form of people who believe that government shouldn't intervene on these kind of issues, that this is symptomatic of a nanny state. Now, I understand where they're coming from in relation to that argument, but I believe that the evidence shows in all of the other areas where we've had to try and catalyse a cultural shift in thinking, whether it be wearing seatbelts in cars, whether it be drink driving, whether it be smoking. All of these issues were brought about because of decisive intervention where government was acting on behalf of the people, in spite of big business, in spite of industry, to say, no, actually, we need to draw a line here because this is costing us too much in so many ways. So some of the argument will be that this legislation, if it's put through, will not dissuade hardcore drinkers. It might not dissuade hardcore drinkers. This legislation isn't just for hardcore drinkers. Hardcore drinkers already have a whole range and raft and plethora of services available for them, including voluntary services, including third sector organisations, including public and private services that are there should they desire to get sober and stay sober. And so there are no shortage of things available for people who wish to go on that journey of achieving sobriety. One of the things that will hasten their journey towards a moment which often is very ugly and often is very painful and often is very undignified and often is very unfair. But nonetheless, this moment occurs in every alcoholic's life many times over, and it's really their choice how many times they want it to occur. And what it is the rock bottom moment. And that rock bottom moment happens, and it gets worse each time. It's different for everyone, but when that happens, a window of opportunity presents itself, and it opens, and through it, you get a bit of insight and self-awareness into your problem. Now, if alcohol becomes increasingly harder to obtain because it's costlier to the person trying to purchase it, and this then forces that alcoholic to make a choice about, are they going to feed their kid, or are they going to drink? Are they going to rob Peter to pay Paul so they can drink? And so on and so forth. Then what you're doing is you're putting more obstacles between the alcoholic and the substance that is bringing so much chaos into their life. So by actually increasing the per unit price of alcohol, you might not discourage hardcore drinkers, but what you will do over time is create a resistance. It makes it harder to obtain. It makes it less convenient. And so this in itself does have a cooling effect. Some people will be forced to confront the implications of their choice to continue drinking in light of the massive cost. And while some people might say, well, what about the kids and what about the community and what about the wider issues? I would argue that those people who are saying that the government shouldn't intervene are actually placing children at risk, because where these cultures of drinking continue, then the chances of abuse towards children and neglect towards children skyrocket. And that's one of the reasons why this is so serious, and that's one of the reasons why we need to try and put aside ideological dogma and actually just address this issue for what it is. Now, some people would say in other countries the alcohol prices are really low and we don't see the same sort of drive and demand for alcohol. I think that's a good point. But in other countries, they have completely different cultures towards alcohol, completely different historical context towards the role that alcohol plays in their society. And so in Scotland, we need to just deal with the fact that we've got a very kind of Russian approach to how we view alcohol and how we drink. And people who drink hardcore to escape, and that there's a bravado attached to it, and that our birth is celebrated with a drink, and our lives are celebrated with a drink, and when we die, people drink to commemorate our life that was abbreviated by drink. So in that instance, then I believe that this legislation is bold. No doubt it can be bolder. No doubt it's just the beginning process. But I'd be interested to see what other measures in conjunction with this legislation are going to be discussed and who's going to be involved in those discussions. Now, the final thing that I want to say is that people believe that this might be a kind of form of prohibition. I don't believe it is a form of prohibition. I believe that this is legislation that is in line with how potentially socially harmful a controlled substance like alcohol is. Alcohol is a social equivalent of plutonium, right? Now, we don't just in a kind of like crazy, mad libertarian world be like, oh, well, why can I not just be allowed to have plutonium? It's a controlled substance because it's radioactive in so many ways, and no substance is more radioactive socially than alcohol. It's a psychoactive chemical. It's powerful. It's potent. It's potentially addictive. It's a depressant. For so many reasons, alcohol and access to alcohol should be limited and should be controlled tightly. And this isn't just for the people who drink now, many of whom don't consider themselves problem drinkers, but actually do drink too much, and that's part of the issue. But also, children being born into this culture If they're born into a culture where alcohol is something they're already priced out of at a young age, then they're not going to develop the relationship with alcohol the way many of us did when we were young, when it was so cheap and readily available. So to decrease the abundance of alcohol and make it less easy and a less easy go-to in an impulsive moment or a stressful moment, actually over time will erode some of those cultural kind of habits that we've got in terms of how we turn to alcohol, how we use alcohol as people and as communities. And so you would hope maybe in 20, 30, 40 years down the line, we would see a dramatic decrease in the amount of young people who use alcohol to socialise. And then we can see of the ones who do, why do they do that? Why do they persist? What are the problems that are driving them towards it? What is it that they're looking to their alcohol to do for them? What are they trying to achieve when they imbibe it into their system? And what other things can we facilitate as a society to try and discourage that beyond just making it a high cost, but also looking at the society that we live in and asking some fundamental questions about the mental burden that it places on young people. But we can't do that when almost everybody is drinking too much. So we need to start somewhere. A 50p minimum price on alcohol per unit is a very sensible, pragmatic approach. And you don't need any bigger a clue that you're on the right track when the whisky industry tries to stall the decision for nearly 2 years, because the food and drink industry, and I include alcohol in this, is one of the most ruthless when it comes to propagating myths about their products in relation to public health, and none has a tighter grip on governments through lobbies, advertising, marketing, so on and so forth, than the food and drink industry. And that's just a fact. So if they oppose it, then that's usually a signal that you're on the right track. It's perfectly natural for them to fight for their position, to fight for the clout that they have in the discussion, to fight for the right to control and dictate the terms of the discussion around food and drink, to the point where dangerous and pernicious myths pervade all of culture about food and drink, such as it's more expensive to eat fresh prepared products, you're cheaper buying processed food, such as fat-free products will help you lose weight, even though they're pumped full of sugar, because a fat-free product is a tasteless product, and so on and so forth. So while I've got a lot of sympathy for people who may be worried about losing jobs in the whisky industry, I don't know if the 50p pricing has got much to do with that. And to be honest, I think there is a lot more at stake here in terms of social cohesion and public health. And if the whisky industry is against it, I tend to take that as a signal that we're on the right track. Anyway, I hope I haven't rambled on too much. I wonder what you guys think below. If you would like to leave some comments, if you have any recommended reading on the subject. These are just some initial thoughts. I'd like to do a bit more work around this. If you've not hit the subscribe button, please do. And just to end, I'll be upgrading the channel soon. It'll have a new look and a new feel, and I'm going to get a new camera and stuff like that. So I'm looking for suggestions from people who enjoy engaging. What sort of subjects would you like to see me discuss? What sort of formats would you like to see them discussed on? Dead open to criticism and feedback, so please just leave that below as well. Otherwise, take it easy. Peace.